Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and a belated Happy New Year. You will notice that there have been some changes around here. The time has come to analyse this film. I have gone through a long and secretive training montage sequence to prepare myself for this endeavour. Before we get into the video proper, we must pass through the valley of obligatory disclaimers. Now, as always, I am not going to discuss the incredible feats and individual heroics of the characters. Why? Because it is part of generic convention that heroes and villains in film are capable of feats and deeds which are beyond that of normal people. Audiences want heroes who are aspirational and inspirational, and they want villains who are competent and threatening. Some degree of plot armour is therefore essential to achieve these ends. I have read the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but I am not going to reference or use materials from the books to aid my assessments. This is a military analysis of the film, the extended edition to be precise, not of the book. Of course, I shall use clips and details from the other two films, The Fellowship of the Ring and The Return of the King, where appropriate, because they are part of the same cinematic story. Now, this film does contain fantasy creatures such as elves, dwarves, ents, orcs, wargs, and urukai, and I shall only be making inferences and conclusions about their traits and abilities from what is portrayed or otherwise implied on the screen. On a similar note, there might be decisions made by the commanders in this film which would make sense to them, because it is in accordance with their personality or some strange internal logic in their heads. But in these critiques, I'm not asking whether the decisions made are congruent with the personality of the characters. I am instead trying to determine whether they are good military decisions. Finally, although I shall be making a number of criticisms on this film's portrayal of military matters, The Two Towers is one of my favourite films, and this video is made in good fun. Some commenters on YouTube may find it hard to believe, but it is possible to criticise something while also respecting it. Time to plug my creative work. Last year I published two family-friendly novels, Escape from Labyrinth and The Northward Journey. The final book in this trilogy will be released sometime late summer this year. I said in this video right here that I would deliver, and I meant it. Last year as well, I also published a family-friendly novella called Earl the Dragon Slayer, and an adults-only novella, The Pub on the Other Side of the Forest. You are hereby given an imperial and royal command to buy these books. You can buy them on Amazon in either ebook or paperback, and there are some audio readings on this channel as well. Links for everything will be in the description. Alright, let's get started. I know we are all raring to get to Helm's Deep and the Battle of the Hornsburg, but we need to talk about some preliminaries first. So the situation in Rohan is dire. Dunderlings and Urukai raid and pillage at will. The king's son, Theodred, is killed in an ambush, and a worm with a tongue is directing the affairs of the kingdom. One of the few lords attempting to do something about the enemy's intrusions, Éomer, the man who will be king of Rohan, is exiled for his troubles. But things start to look up when Gandalf, but now in white, comes to Edoras and performs an exorcism on Theoden the Unready, which results in the worm with a tongue being thrown out of the city. Later, after the funeral of Theodred, some children arrive with a direct account of how their village was raided by Isengard forces. Gandalf, but now in white, and Aragorn, the man who will be king of Gondor, provide Theoden the Unready with the same advice. Marshal your forces, including Éomer, and fight the roaming warbands on the open battlefield. Aragorn suggests summoning Éomer back to Edoras. Theoden the Unready, however, rejects the advice to fight in open battle, and opts for leaving Edoras and going to shelter in Helm's Deep with his people. Now, is this a good decision? There are certainly benefits to moving to Helm's Deep. It is certainly easier to defend than Edoras, and since a lot of the civilians in the city don't seem to be soldiers, it would be a good way to keep them safe. There are also benefits to choosing to fight immediately, and not bothering to move to Helm's Deep. However, this decision is not a mistake in and of itself. It all depends on what is done after. If the idea is to take the civilians to the safety of Helm's Deep because Edoras cannot be defended, and then to gather the forces of Rohan, then a lot of good arguments can be made in its favour. If the plan, however, is to shelter in Helm's Deep and attempt to outlast Isengard, as is suggested by these lines.
I know what it is you want of me, but I will not bring further death to my people. I will not risk open war. They will break upon this fortress like water on rock. Saruman's hordes will pillage and burn. We've seen it before. Crops can be resown. Homes rebuilt. Within these walls, we will outlast them.
Then it is ridiculous. For starters, Helm's Deep doesn't have enough space to house the entire country of Rohan. And even if it did, the Urukai, Orcs and Gunderlings might decide to settle in the vacant country rather than merely pillage and leave. In which case, the Rohirrim would have to fight anyway to get their country back. But let us imagine a scenario where the people of Rohan hide in Helm's Deep and the forces of Isengard simply do pillage and leave. What would happen next? Well, looking at Old English history, it is clear to me that paying the Dane-geld doesn't get rid of the Dane. So in all probability, paying the Uruk-geld wouldn't get rid of the Uruk. And make no mistake, huddling behind stone walls and letting your country be pillaged for free is a type of Dane-geld. Isengard would come back and pillage again and again, so the Rohirrim would be forced to fight back eventually. In short, hiding in Helm's Deep and not fighting back is just delaying the inevitable and is not a viable strategy. Better to bite the bullet than kick the tin further down the road. But again, in isolation, the decision to go to Helm's Deep is not a mistake per se. However, what is a mistake is Theoden's refusal to rally his forces. He says that Éomer is too far away and doesn't send any messengers to the rest of his lords telling them to gather their forces. Gandalf, but now in white, takes on this responsibility and rides out to gather the forces of Rohan, including Éomer. If you were going to conduct a military campaign, defensive or offensive in nature, I should not need to explain why you need to rally your forces, why you need to alert your troops that it is time for war. Theoden the Unready's refusal to send messengers and to marshal his troops is so stupid that it cannot be stressed enough. It doesn't matter if the only plan is to sit in Helm's Deep and twiddle thumbs. Marshalling the rest of your troops is essential in case the Urukai of Isengard decide to assault the fortress. Because Theoden didn't even try to summon his own warriors, there are only 300 men available to defend Helm's Deep when the Urukai arrive to siege later in the film. But more on that point later. Let us briefly discuss the Warg Riders' assault. This is the first extended battle sequence in the film. There are no tactics beyond charging at each other, but this is to be expected given the context. On one side, the Warg Riders were not in position to ambush the convoy, because their scout attacked early, and the Rohirrim had to charge the Orcs to stop them from attacking the civilians. There isn't a great deal to say here, other than the Warg Riders would have the advantage in this battle, simply because the Wargs themselves would be the more dangerous mounts. I'm sure someone will comment here that in actual history, war horses were trained to kick, bite, trample, and otherwise hurt enemies, so these horses would be dangerous mounts as well. Now, of course, the horses used in this film were not trained to be war horses, and no actors would want to work with them if they were, as they would be dangerous to film with. However, even if the film were to depict the horses kicking, biting, etc., the wargs would still be the more dangerous mounts, as they are stocky, have strong front legs for pouncing on prey, and have a mouth full of sharp teeth. Indeed, the film shows the wargs killing a lot of the Rohirrim themselves. The Rohirrim riders in this scene do have spears, but most of the fighting seems to involve swords. Considering the dangerous nature of the wargs, I would advise using spears and/or lances to take out the wargs first, and focus on the riders later, as, truth be told, the orc riders don't seem to be the greatest threat in this scene. The wargs are doing all the heavy lifting. This summarises my thoughts on this short skirmish. So 10,000 Urukai are sent to march on Helm's Deep. This appears to be the vast majority of Saruman I White's forces, and presumably all his Urukai, as we only see orcs defending Isengard when the Ents attack later in the film. Aragorn, the man who will be King of Gondor, was wounded in the last fight and fell into a river. After encountering a friendly horse, he makes his way to Helm's Deep, sees the army, and reports it to Theoden the Unready. He says of the host,
"All Isengard is emptied.
And says that the Urukai army numbers
10,000 strong at least."
He also tells Theoden that the army will arrive by nightfall. Here's a question. Why is Aragorn the one telling him this? Theoden left Edoras and went to Helm's Deep because he knew Saruman would unleash his armies and warbands on Rohan, and yet he sent no scouts, placed no sentries in Rohan or around Isengard to report on the enemy's activities. If Theoden had sent out any scouts, he would have been informed of this army before it had made so much progress to Helm's Deep, and would have more time to prepare for the siege. Intelligence is essential in all warfare. Why did he not make any efforts to obtain some? Even in this dark time, King Theoden the Unready refuses to call for aid from anyone. Aragorn, the man who will be King of Gondor, advises him to ask Gondor for help, and Theoden responds,
Where was Gondor when the Westfall fell? Where was Gondor when our enemies closed in around us? Where was Gondor? No, my lord Aragorn. We are alone.
And truth be told, I think Theoden is right here. The likelihood that Gondor would help is quite small, but going back to my points earlier in this video, he should have sent messages to Éomer and other Rohirrim captains and attempted to marshal his forces from the start. He needs all the men and all the warriors he can get, and yet he seems to be fatalistic and convinced that he has to make do with what he has at current. He is acting like the captain of the Titanic, who knew for a fact that the people under his command were doomed. There are 300 men defending Helm's Deep. Some of them are actually boys. Seriously, what are these kids going to do in a fight other than die horribly? But an unspecified number of elves from Lothlorien arrive to help. I'm guessing they number 100 or maybe 200, which is serendipitous, because the morale of these 300 would be at the lowest level ever measured after these exchanges between Aragorn, the man who will be King of Gondor, and Legolas, the one who saw they were taking the hobbits to Isengard.
Look at them. They're frightened. I can see it in their eyes. Boyahun, Neled Herain, Dan Carmenig. Siberia Farhun, Amar Nanedoras. Aragorn, Nedin Dagor, Hen Urir Otari, Natha Dagathire.
Then I shall die as one of them.
Now how did these elves arrive to Helm's Deep so quickly? I'm not too sure, to be honest. Magic, I guess? Most of the elves are positioned on the Deeping Wall, aka the Hornburg Outer Wall. The majority of the men are on the inner wall and at the gatehouse. Finally, the Urukai arrive just as it starts to rain. I honestly don't know why the Urukai decided to start the assault at this time. While we can guess that the Urukai might have better vision in the darkness, fighting in a downpour is ill-advised, as doing anything for extended periods in the wet and damp is a recipe for getting sick. As well, water can make many tasks difficult to do, such as digging tunnels, setting up siege equipment, lighting fuses, and using crossbows, because when bowstrings get wet, they loosen and are less capable of maintaining tension, which is vital for shooting projectiles. The first order of the night should have been to set up a camp, wait for the rain to stop, assemble siege equipment such as siege shields, ladders, and ballistae, then organise themselves, and then assault the walls. It's honestly a daft decision that the Urukai are doing this, especially since they would be tired after such a long journey, but I guess they are hungry for blood after marching for so long. In fact, since there were no supply wagons to be seen in the last few shots of the army, I have to assume the Urukai have been foraging and living off the land on their journey to Helm's Deep. Foraging, for small warbands, is one thing, but doing so for a force of 10,000? Basically impossible, unless the land being traversed is the world's breadbasket. It is possible the Urukai literally have no food, and they have to get this siege over with as quickly as possible so they don't starve. If this is the case, then I can only describe this oversight in logistics as the single greatest act of incompetence seen in this film. Before any military operation is carried out, logistics and the bare minimum, which is food and water, must be considered and accounted for. Now, in the film, the Urukai do manage to breach the outer wall in just a few hours, but imagine if they didn't. Imagine that dawn broke the next day, and they hadn't managed to break through. They might have to settle for a longer siege while they re-evaluate their plans. And this is where having a secure supply of food and water would be essential. Knowing how violent Urukai and orcs can get when there is no meat on the menu, and knowing how long sieges can actually go on for, a competent commander would have insisted upon arranging for food and water to be available in vast quantities to ensure that discipline would not break down, and the siege would not peter out if the first few assaults were unsuccessful in making any headway. It would appear no one competent is leading this Urukai army. As the Urukai begin pounding the ground within arrow shot of the defenders to intimidate them, the archers of the Hornburg draw their bows and hold. Now, with bows of a small draw weight, it is possible to hold a string back for an extended period, but bows which are designed to kill other human beings or orcs have heavy draw weights, 75 pounds or over, so it is not possible to hold them back for too long. Here are some clips of people using historically accurate longbows.
You say that's slightly smaller. Do you want to explain what that bow is and what the poundage is?
So here we've got a self-ash bow, made single piece of English ash. This one measures around 75 pounds at 32 inches draw. It's a kind of lighter weight, the minimum weight for what modern classification of a warbow is.
So this is your lightweight warbow, and this is your kind of full weight warbow, which we're going to see. So you want me to try that?
Yeah. We'll start you off on a little and see how we get on. That's it, much better.
Oh, not touching the arrow, so I've got to...
Much better.
And
that's the one, yeah. At the same time. That's it. Nice.
Mine was over.
You can see how much effort it takes to use them. If these longbows were designed to kill, none of the defenders would be able to hold the strings back for this long, and the fact that they are able to do so here proves that they must be super strong. One of the defenders, the Bowmaster, lets loose early, because he cannot hold it any longer, and Aragorn, the man who will be King of Gondor, is upset by this, as are the Urukai, who do not appreciate their haka being interrupted. However, the question here is why the defenders even bothered to draw their bows if they weren't planning on loosing immediately. The Urukai seemed happy to pound the ground, and the archers weren't going anywhere, and drawing a bow doesn't take so long. The defenders could have waited and drawn their bows later, when the commanders actually wanted volleys to be loosed. Upset that their war dance was interrupted, the Urukai charge at the wall and do a lot of different things at once, so let's break this down. Some Urukai in this swarm have crossbows and shoot the defenders. Others have ladders and start using them to scale the walls. Others start setting up ballistae, and a few engineers start prepping explosives. The majority, however, are hovering around the ladders and the wall, hoping to climb up and fight the defenders. A contingent also goes to the gatehouse with a battering ram. In terms of what is being attempted, it is sound enough, but how these groups are executing the operation is not optimized in the slightest. For starters, why are so many of these Urukai armed with pikes? They can't reach the defenders from the bottom of the wall, and they would not be useful in a close quarters fight on top of the walls even if you were able to climb the ladders with them. Seriously, they should ditch the pikes. Secondly, I described the Urukai earlier as a swarm, and for good reason. While each Uruk seems to know what his job is, none of them is coordinated. The crossbow Uruks are not arranged into units, so they can coordinate their fire and loose volleys. Instead, they are loosing as individuals. Because of all the Urukai standing around waiting for a chance to get up on the walls, the Uruks with the ladders have to make their way through their comrades, and this would reduce the speed at which they would be able to set up their ladders. The engineers with the explosives would have similar issues to the Uruks with the ladders. Everything would grind to a halt because nearly everyone is acting as an individual, rather than as part of an organised unit or set of units. My suggestions here would be thus. A. For all the Urukai who are part of the infantry, do not charge towards the wall and hover there doing nothing. You will get in the way of the engineers and the ladders, and slow them down and expose yourselves as sitting ducks. Instead, advance with the ladders and queue in an orderly manner. B. For the crossbows. It is your job to provide suppressive fire to keep the defenders down, so they do not shoot the Uruks carrying the ladders. You should organise into units and loose massed volleys for the greatest chance of taking out defending archers, and for the intimidation factor, which will keep their heads down. C. Delay the battle, so some siege shields can be set up and brought forwards to defend the crossbows from the defending archers. I have made two very basic maps to show how the Urukai forces should be arranged. This one shows an approximation of how the Urukai are organised at the start of the assault on the Deeping Wall, and this shows an ideal model of how they should be organised. The film may show the Urukai getting things done even within all this chaos, but realistically, things would get bogged down quickly if they proceeded to do things in this manner. In the chaos of battle, the Uruk engineers succeed in blowing up a part of the wall, while the majority of the Urukai army is there. This explosion would probably kill as many of the attackers as it would the defenders. I will go through a list of reasons why setting off an explosive with your own troops in the blast radius is a bad idea. Number 1, it weakens your own assault. Losing your own troops needlessly, when you need them organised and numerous to exploit a breach, would disrupt the potency of your own assault. Number 2, losing forces in general will negatively affect your ability to accomplish other broader strategic goals. This isn't a computer game, where if you defeat the enemy, you win, and in the next mission you can just spawn new units from the ether. It would have taken time to assemble these Urukai, and it would have also taken time to train and armour them. And all of this would have to be done from finite resources. Wasting investments like this is bad practice. It has to be remembered that the rest of Rohan is very much unconquered, and there would be resistance in other parts of the country which would need to be crushed, such as Eomer and his company. Having as many troops as possible still available to take the rest of the country after this siege is more than just advisable. It is good strategy. It is not just this battle which needs to be won. Other battles would take place, and it is not worth winning a battle or war if you end up losing the peace, because you don't have the forces to enforce your will. Number 3, potential discord and rebellion in your own ranks. In war, soldiers expect the enemy to try killing them. What they don't expect is their own comrades to try killing them. While blowing up the wall is good, killing your own troops in such a reckless manner to achieve this objective would cause distrust between them and their commanders, and between them and different branches of the army, namely the engineers and the common infantry. Trying to command a force which is rife with internal division and mistrust would be an absolute nightmare, and would only impede your ability to command, not only in this battle, but in others as well. Now, I know the wall was blown up from the bottom. However, it is remarkably clear of debris, and this is unlikely. The chances are there would be stones, rubble, and other chunks of rock on the ground, which would make it difficult to pass through. When this breach is made in the Deeping Wall, and the besiegers start pouring through, Aragorn orders a volley to be loosed into the Urukai charging through, and it seems super effective. But he doesn't order another volley to be loosed, which would make sense as it would hold the Urukai back. Instead, he orders a countercharge. While he clearly wants to save Gimli, the platonic ideal of the dwarves who is drowning in that deep puddle, it isn't the right tactical or strategic decision. If the volleys were this effective at keeping the Urukai back, and could be loosed again and again with ease, it appears the elven archers are very good at this and do find it easy, then it would make sense to continue loosing, until the defending troops have recovered from the shock of the explosion and have regrouped. It does need stressing here that it would take time for the defenders to recover from this sudden and unexpected development on the battlefield, and, to be fair, it would take some time for the attackers to exploit this development as well. Now we're going to skip these scenes involving the gatehouse and the rest of the siege, because most of these are just individual heroics from the main cast, and because honestly there isn't much to criticise. I don't know whether the ladders connected to these ballista bolts with rope would work or not, as I cannot remember reading about any such contraptions like this in any history book, but in theory they could work as depicted. Obviously, The ladders and ropes would need to be immensely strong to handle being pulled into position while also covered with armoured Urukai. There is one nitpick though. What are these Urukai doing here? The ones standing behind the engineer crew preparing the ballista. Providing moral support? They don't appear to be part of the engineer crew. Let's go to the final scenes at Helm's Deep where the defenders are pushed back into the keep. The final charge makes sense in order to buy time for the children, women and other civilians to escape through the mountains. And also to die in style, since death seems inevitable at this point for the defenders. However, this charge would lose momentum very quickly, as the horses would eventually break something charging through this many Urukai, and would trip and fall over. Before Aragorn, Theoden and Legolas can die gloriously with the rest of the defenders, Gandalf, Éomer and a massive force of Rohirrim arrive to deprive them of that pleasure. Now, this charge led by Gandalf but now in white and Éomer, the man who will be King of Rohan, would be costly, if not for the wizard's magic, which shines bright light on the Urukai, making them drop their pikes. The Urukai are routed, and the survivors then flee into the trees of Fangorn, where they are quickly dispatched, leaving the Rohirrim victorious. Let's do some quick takes on some of the other battles in this film before wrapping up. In Osgiliath we see these archers free-loosing at some enemy off the screen. We cannot tell what they are shooting at, but I'm curious as to why they are free-loosing rather than loosing volleys as a unit. Surely loosing volleys would be more effective. Now, what can I say about the Ents' destruction of Isengard other than, if you ever find yourself under assault by walking and talking trees, and you do not have modern explosives, you should run for the hills. Oh, as well, wood does not burn or light this quickly, but maybe the orc archers are using some special oil or magic. So that is my analysis of the two towers. To be honest, there is not a great deal to criticise or even nitpick. It is broadly done quite well militarily, and from a cinematic perspective, it is incredible, especially the Siege of Helm's Deep. In so many ways, the Siege of Helm's Deep has not been bested in cinema, and the other battles, such as the fight between the Rohirrim and the Wargs, the Ent destruction of Isengard, and the Gondorian Ranger ambush on the Haradrim, have set the tone and benchmark for fantasy film and imagination. The Fellowship of the Ring was a landmark film, and The Two Towers is no different. Now, unless I have missed a great film somewhere, I think we will be waiting a very long time until we see a siege in film which equals or bests The Two Towers. I want to thank Cinder Mountain Villager for the new intro. I'd also like to thank Leo Guinid for the diving suit animation. And finally, I'd like to express my thanks to MV for the new YouTube banner art which I've used as the background for this video. Cinder Mountain Villager can be found at Cinder Mountain on Twitter. Leo Guinid can be found at LeoVOMage on Twitter and on Facebook as well. And MV can be found at MDVNSN on Twitter, and he also has a website which has been linked in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like, share and subscribe. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all have an excellent day.